30 kilometers, 40 kilograms, 20 years. These are the three numbers that define the Roman legionary, and none of them is what it seems at first glance. 30 kilometers was the distance of a standard day's march. The ustum, the justified march, the one that Vigesius records as the operational norm of the imperial army. 40 kilograms was the approximate weight of the complete kit that each man carried on his body over that distance. 20 years was the time of service that the army expected from each soldier who enlisted. And if you put those three numbers together and calculate what they imply, the result does not make immediate sense. A man walking 30 kilometers per day with 40 kilograms on his back, repeating that exercise not as an exceptional event, but as the description of an ordinary Tuesday. Before you can ask how that was physiologically possible, there is a prior question that almost no one asks. Why? Why did the most lethal army of antiquity build its system around something as primitive as putting one foot in front of the other repeatedly for weeks and months and years? What did the march do that nothing else could do? The answer is the story of how Rome turned human movement into a strategic weapon, and it is considerably stranger than it seems. Most representations of the Roman army focus on battle. The tortoise formation, the gladius at close range, the standards advancing across the field. But Polybius, the Greek historian who observed the Roman army closely during the 1st century before our era, identified something different as the true source of its power. It was not the weaponry, it was not the tactics, it was the logistics, the ability to move where it needed to be, at the moment it needed to be there, with the full force in combat condition. An army that can cover 30 kilometers per day with complete tactical cohesion is an army that can appear where the enemy does not expect it, in a time that the enemy cannot calculate. In the logic of ancient warfare, that was not a marginal advantage. It was the difference between fighting on the ground you had chosen or on the one you had been assigned. To understand what the march meant in practice, one must start with what preceded it, and with the man who changed it. The early Republican Roman army depended on a baggage train of carts, mules and slaves that sometimes doubled the size of the fighting column. The army could not move faster than its carts. When it tried to force the march, the supplies did not follow. When it waited for the supplies, it lost tactical initiative. The enemy always had time to respond, because the Roman army arrived exactly when it could be expected to arrive. The transformation came with Gaius Marius, consul of Rome for 7 consecutive years between 107 and 100 before our era. Marius's solution was counterintuitive to the point of seeming cruel: to eliminate much of the baggage train by transferring the weight directly to the soldiers. And each legionary marched with his own ration of grain for several days, his camp construction tools, his palisade stake, his personal equipment and his weapons. Plutarch in his life of Marius records that the soldiers who marched under those conditions began to call themselves the Muli Mariani, Marius's mules. The nickname was both an insult and an exact description. It was also, although the men who used it did not appreciate it at the time, the involuntary recognition that the army had changed in nature. The Muli Mariani could move without waiting for anyone. The fighting column was the logistical column, and that column could march. Describing the complete kit of the imperial legionary is not an inventory exercise. It is understanding a philosophy. Each man marched with the pilum, the heavy Roman javelin with a soft iron tip designed to bend on impact with a shield and render it useless. 1 or 2 of these between 2 and 4 kilograms each. The gladius in its leather scabbard. The scutum, the curved rectangular shield, between 5 and 8 kilograms. The articulated plate armor, the helmet. Just the combat equipment easily reached 20 kilograms. To that was added the sarcina, the standard pack mounted on a wooden fork called a furca that each legionary carried over his left shoulder. The sarcina contained the grain ration, the cooking equipment, the part of the papilio that corresponded to him out of the 8 who shared a tent, the palisade stake, the dolabra, the pickaxe that appears so frequently in the funerary reliefs of soldiers that historians treat it as a symbol of the legionary as much as the gladius. The furka is not a minor detail. It is an ergonomic engineering solution to distribute the weight so that the load balanced forward and backward on the body during the march, freeing the arms and allowing immediate grip of the weapon if the column was attacked. A man carrying 40 kilograms well distributed on a furka moves differently and endures more than a man carrying the same weight stacked on his back. The reliefs of the imperial period show the furka with a consistency that indicates standardization. Not personal choice, always over the left shoulder. The load balanced in both directions, the right hand free. Vegetius specifies in the De Re Militari that the soldiers should be able to carry their marching implements at the same pace as they walked without them. Not as an exceptional skill, but as the minimum fitness standard for service. Now put 5,000 of those men on the road at the same time. 5,000 men marching with that weight in that order for hours. Chaos is the spontaneous response. The Roman legion turned that response into its opposite. Josephus, the Jewish historian who observed the Roman army closely during the Jewish War, and whose description of the marching column in the Jewish War remains the most detailed surviving account of a Roman army in motion from antiquity, describes the structure of that column with cartographic precision. At the front went the exploratores, or reconnaissance cavalry, that preceded the column at a sufficient distance to detect ambushes before the main column was visible to the enemy. Behind them, the mensors, the camp technicians who rode ahead to reach the camping point before the column, mark the ground and assign every position of the future castra. The camp for that night was being planned while the column was still hours away. Then came the main column, the infantry vanguard, the engineers with their tools at the front to clear the path, the cavalry on the flanks, the line infantry in the center. The centurions marched at the sides of their centuries, the vites visible in the left hand. The rhythm was the rhythm of the cornixen, specific signals that the legionary learned in his first weeks of training and that coordinated 5,000 individuals into an organism with a single will of movement. What Josephus is describing is not a crowd moving in one direction. It is an articulated machine that distributes 5,000 bodies in space, with the same precision with which it distributes them in battle formation. There is a reason why the legions could maintain their pace on terrain where no contemporary army can follow them, and that reason is literally under their feet. The Roman road network was not built for commerce, although commerce used it intensively. It was built so that the legions could march. The distinction matters because it defines the technical characteristics that the engineers optimized. Width sufficient for the passage of a complete column. Surface that maintained traction under rain and snow. Lateral drainage that avoided puddling, that turns any dirt road into a mud trap for heavily loaded columns. The standard Via Munita had between 4 and 6 meters of width, built in layers with a road surface slightly cambered in the center to evacuate water toward the ditches. The difference between a well-built Roman road and a dirt road after 3 days of rain was not one of degree, but of category. The legion could cross one at 30 kilometers per day. On the dirt road, it might not be able to cross it at all. In the year 49, before our era, when Caesar needed to move his legions from northern Italy to Hispania to confront the lieutenants of Pompey, he covered the distance in less time than his enemies had calculated as the minimum possible. His legions arrived before the defense was prepared. That speed was a direct consequence of the road that connected northern Italy with Gallia Narbonensis, and from there toward Hispania. The complete network at the imperial peak had approximately 80,000 kilometers of main roads. Every kilometer was potentially the axis of movement of a legion. Rome did not need to surprise its enemies with new weapons. It needed to arrive before what they calculated was possible. The road was the force multiplier that guaranteed exactly that. But a road does not make a soldier capable of marching it with 40 kilograms. The human body has to be built for that. The tyro, the recruit, before completing his basic training, began with something that no ancient source presents as secondary: walking. Vegetius is specific in the order of priorities. Before learning to use weapons, the recruit learned to march. The iter was the first technical skill of the legionary, as trained and progressive as any later exercise with the gladius. The process was one of deliberately gradual accumulation. The load increased as the musculature adapted. The distance extended as the cardiovascular capacity was built week by week. Vegetius specifies 2 standard marching speeds that the recruits had to reach before being considered fit for service. The ordinary military step, 20 Roman miles in 5 hours, and the cursus, the rapid step for tactical emergencies, both with full load. The first was the everyday standard. The second was for when the everyday standard was not fast enough. The training also included river crossing as an irrenounceable requirement. The legionary had to be able to cross a river with his equipment, because bridges could be destroyed, and the army that waits on the shore loses exactly the initiative that the march had taken days to build. In the excavations at Caerleon, the base of the Legio Secunda Augusta in southern Wales, training swimming facilities have been confirmed inside the fort. It was not optional training. It was part of the basic curriculum that turned a man into a legionary. The first 3 months produced a man who could march the Ustum with full load without collapsing. The years of active service produced something different. A man for whom that pace was normal, whose body had eliminated all unnecessary movement, who reserved the energy that a recruit spent adapting for what came at the end of the road. The musculature of a veteran with 10 years of active marching was recognizable even outside the uniform. Roman doctors knew well the specific chronic injuries of the Ustum. The knee joints documented in the records of the valetudinaria of the frontier forts speak of men who had repeated that movement enough times for the wear to become statistically predictable. The body of the legionary was, in the most literal sense, the product of a precision manufacturing system. The speed of the Roman army also became a psychological factor. Caesar documents it in the Bellum Gallicum without seeming to realize how extraordinary what he is describing is. The Gallic tribes calculated with the standard of any other army of their world. The Roman standard was another. And today, the margin between the two was the space within which Caesar operated, with a precision that his enemies described with resignation. We could not arrive before them because we could never calculate when they were going to be here. Tacitus, in his accounts of the campaigns of Germanicus in the north, records situations in which Germanic chiefs find themselves facing the legion in positions they thought they had days to prepare. It was not magic. It was the system working in an integrated way. The Ustum, plus the road, plus the training, plus the scouting system that never stopped the column to gather information. Each component separately would have been insufficient. Together, they produced something that no individual component could produce. Now, put a body inside that system. A 22-year-old legionary of the Legio Tertia Gallica, stationed in Syria during the Flavian period. The cornet signal sounds before dawn. The tents of the camp are still in darkness when the men of the contubernium, the 8 who share a tent, sleep, eat and march together, begin to move in the order that training has turned into a nameless reflex. Store the papilio, divide the weight of the contubernium, mount the sarcina on the furca. There is no unnecessary conversation. The collective noise of 5,000 men executing the same sequence at the same time is a sound without equivalent in modern life. Metal on metal, leather against leather. The dull percussion of wood and equipment multiplied by 5,000, flowing into the marching formation. The column begins to move when the cornicing signal gives the order, and the caligay, the hobnailed sandals that the legionary has walked until they adapt exactly to the shape of his feet, make the specific sound on the stone of the road that someone who has heard it once does not forget. The metallic clatter of thousands of iron hobnails against the roadway in the same rhythm at the same time, as if the entire stone were being struck systematically in a measure that does not stop. It is not the sound of men marching. It is the sound of an institution moving. After 5 hours, the column has covered approximately 20 kilometers. The Furka has been on the shoulder since dawn, with the regulated pauses every hour that the centurions enforce not out of kindness, but because a man who does not unload his shoulder at the stops arrives at kilometer 25 with his arm half dead. And a man with his arm half dead does not dig the ditch at the end of the day with the speed the system requires, because at the end of the 30 kilometers, the column does not arrive at an already built camp where the men deposit their load and rest. It arrives at the ground where the camp is going to be built, marked by the mensors who rode ahead hours earlier. The men who have marched 30 kilometers with 40 kilograms dig a trench. The doctrine of the Roman camp. The castra was absolute in its demand, regardless of how long that position was going to be used. 1 night, 3 days, or the rest of the year. The camp was built with the same standards in every case. Vegetius and Polybius are consistent on this point, and archaeology confirms what the written sources describe. The Roman marching camp excavated on the plain of the Po is archaeologically distinguishable from the Roman marching camp excavated on the bank of the Rhone by the artifacts it contains, not by its structure or its dimensions. The standard perimeter ditch was approximately 3 meters wide by 2 meters deep, excavated by hand by the same men who had marched all day with the tools they had carried on their backs. The extracted earth was piled inside to build the agger on which the palisade was fixed. The entrance had the configuration of the clavicula. The key, a curve of the wall that forced any attacker to expose his unprotected right flank. That configuration appears in all archaeologically documented Roman marching camps from Britain to Syria. It was not an improvised solution by local engineers. It was standard doctrine applied every time in every terrain, in every region of the empire, until the shape of the entrance became the unmistakable signature of the Roman presence in any landscape. That combination, 30 kilometers of march, plus the complete construction of the camp at the end, is what separates the Roman army from any other military force of its time, not as a degree of training, but as a distinct category of organization. They are not individually stronger warriors. They are an institution that has solved with engineering and progressive training and standardization of every component the problem of moving military power across continental distances without losing tactical cohesion or perimeter security or the ability to fight at the end of each day. Each piece of the system supports the others. The road supports the pace. The training supports the body. The castra supports the security, and the security supports the will to march again at dawn. The ustum, those 30 miles with those 40 kilograms, was not the standard of the best days. It was the standard of every day during an active campaign, sustained under those conditions for weeks by tens of thousands of men distributed along the 5,000 kilometers of the empire's land frontier at its peak. It represents something that is only fully understood when put in perspective with what came afterward. The armies of medieval Europe did not have the road infrastructure that made that pace possible under adverse conditions. They did not have the logistical system that guaranteed resupply at the end of each stage. They did not have the institutionalized progressive training that built the body capable of sustaining it for years. What Rome built would not exist again in the Western world on a comparable scale until the armies of the 19th century began to use the railway to solve the same problem that Marius had solved in another way. How to move military power across continental distances faster than the enemy can respond. The problem was identical. The tools were different and the principle was exactly the same. The 20-mile march is not brutality. It is not punishment. It is the most sophisticated solution that the ancient world produced to the most fundamental problem of war. To arrive earlier, to arrive in condition, to arrive with the ability to fight at the end of the road, and after fighting, to build the safe space from which to start the next day. That this system demanded of the bodies of the men who sustained it, what it demanded of them. The weight of the furka, that at 20 kilometers stops feeling like equipment and starts feeling like a permanent part of one's own skeleton. The hands with blisters from the dolabra in soil they had never excavated before. It is inseparable from what that system was. It is not the cost of the system. It is the system itself. And which seems more difficult to believe to you. That the Roman army could march that distance with that load every day, or that upon arriving the first thing it did was start building. Leave it in the comments, because the answer says something about how we understand discipline. If this video changed what you thought a Roman march was, subscribe to the channel. Every week we answer a specific question about daily life in Rome, the Vatican and the ancient world. The next one is already waiting.